The snake trying. The snake trying to escape the pursuing stick with sudden curvings of thin, long body. How beautiful and graceful are his shapes.
The Snake Trying by W. W. E. Ross. Most of us think of English literature as the literature coming out of England. But that was years ago, the colonial period. But post-colonial, we have to admit that we've got literature in the English language coming out from Australia, from Canada, from India, from Africa, and so on and so forth. So today we are going to look at what I would be talking about as French Canadian poetry as well as English Canadian poetry. Interestingly, probably the earliest poems in English written in Canada began with the early fathers, if you remember, the Pilgrim Fathers, we call them. And they came and they described the land that they saw. William Wrighton Eustace Ross, 1894 to 1966. He was a poet, of course, but he was also a geophysicist. Think of the combination. One looks at both these two jobs, not really as being mutually exclusive, but just imagine, here we have a geophysicist who was interested in the land around him. And he thought every poem must have a geographical entity. So he writes in free verse, greatly influenced by Japanese poetry, a bit of imagism too. His earliest poems were written as early as 1923, and the first collection of poems was called Laconics. The Snake Trying by Ross. What do you think the snake is trying to do? Or better still, let me ask you, when you look at a snake, what is the first emotion that most human beings are filled with? And you must admit that it is fear. But this poem talks about more from the snake's point of view. So if you look at a snake, you think it's poisonous, it might harm you, and therefore you want to kill it. But this poem, the title is The Snake Trying. What is it trying to do? It is trying to escape the pursuing stick. So you have the human being and you have the snake. What do? We want to kill it, we want to push it away, but certainly we want to harm it. So here in this poem, the poet talks about the beauty of the snake. The poet talks about how the snake is harmless. The poet talks about the beauty of the snake which wants to be left alone. The snake trying to escape the pursuing stick with sudden curvings of thin, long body. I think if you are at a distance or if you're looking at a snake in a zoo, probably because it is inside the glass box and we are safe, I think many of us admire the sleekness of its body. So the observer here, the persona that the poet is taking, is someone, a human being, an individual who is looking at the snake, wants to shoo it away, wants to push it away, but at the same time is amazed at, is almost entranced by the beauty of the body of the snake. We can see that the poet is very appreciative of the snake, which probably is a symbol of all objects of nature. How beautiful and graceful are his shapes. So first you have the shape, the skin, the shining, and then he talks about the movement of the snake. Remember, the snake is not walking on legs. After all, it slithers along the ground. And it's such a graceful movement. But we are here near a body of water. So what does the snake do? It moves towards the water, probably realizing that it is safer in the water than it is on land. Probably because it can swim away faster than man can reach it. So he says, "Oh, let him go over the water, into the reeds to hide without hurt." That's another point, because there is the grass, the water weeds, the reeds. So when the snake goes there, the snake is probably green in color or brown in color, and the reeds give it that obvious advantage of camouflage, whereas man himself will not be so comfortable as he tries to find his way through the reeds into the water. And then the poet goes on to tell us that the color of the snake is green. So he is harmless even to children. So let him go and let him vanish into the ripple. That was a very short poem that you just read, tried to understand, and I hope it made sense to you. But of course, every poem, every poet does bring in beauty. I'm not talking about the beauty of the snake, but I'm talking about the literary devices that most poets use. A very, very simple figure of speech literary device that we see here is personification. I'm sure you've come across the word personification, where a non-human object, or sometimes even an inanimate object, is given certain features, certain characteristics of human beings or of animate objects. See, here we have the snake being personified, right? Because the snake is all that human beings try to harm. The stick becomes a symbol of maybe cruelty, because it is with the with the stick that we try to attack, that we try to in some way inflict cruelty on the snake, the harmless snake, remember, the beautiful snake, remember. And then we have synecdoche. Synecdoche, not a very easy one, not a very common one. Some of you might have heard of metonymy and synecdoche. What is synecdoche? When a part stands for the whole. For example, when you say, "Give me bread," what you're really asking for is not bread per se, but you're asking for food. So bread stands for food. Some of you might have heard of the crown, standing for the king, for the royalty, for the ruler. In the same way, here he says, into the ripples. You can't move into the ripples. The ripples are a part of the water. So here the synecdoche that is there is where the word ripples is used when actually the poet is talking of water. Yes, and of course, many poets are fond of enjambment, where the line spills over into the next line. Just look at the first line or the first two lines of the poem. The snake trying to escape the pursuing stick. The first line ends at trying, but the meaning does not end there. There's no punctuation there. The snake trying to escape the pursuing stick. Look at line 3 and 4. Curvings of thin. The line ends, but not the meaning. Thin, long body. And so it goes on. So we have enjambment. I also want you to notice that the poem is written in free verse, and we can't really divide it into stanzas, and therefore we can't talk of rhyme scheme either. So it's a kind of a poem which is almost conversational in tone, as if the poet is describing something to us. A snake. Do you think this is the only poem about the snake which has been written? Some of you might remember The Snake by D.H. Lawrence. I think it's one of the best known poems about the snake. And there are many more poems about animals, about tigers maybe, and so on. About lambs, for example, they are such cute creatures. About birds, just think of the romantic poets and ever so many bird poems will come to your mind. The skylark maybe, the dove maybe, and so on. The cuckoo, for example, and so on. The nightingale, oh, I could go on, and so many more. So, do pick up a good book of poems. When I say book, you're probably smiling and saying, who picks up a book? Okay, go to your Kindle, just browse through and look at some poems. I'm sure you'll enjoy reading poems about all these feathered friends or four-legged creatures or slithering snakes. I hope you enjoyed this poem. and listening to me.
Along the sand he lay until observed and chased away, and now he vanishes in the ripples among the green, slim reeds.